Alright guys, welcome back to the shop. So we've got two things I want to try and get done today. First off, I want to get both of our sod rails fully cleaned up and glued up today. That way we're working with a nice solid piece. That way tomorrow when we come back into the shop, we can cut our tenons onto the ends and then we can work on fitting those up into the headboard and footboard legs before we get close to gluing up the headboard and footboard. Then I'm hoping that that's not going to take me all day to get to that point. We're then going to move on to the headboard and get all of those parts all fitted together because we have those big panels that we have to flatten through the drum sander, which is going to be a little bit interesting. And we've got just generally bigger pieces. So with these side rails, the biggest thing we have to go back in and do is just touch up the shoulders on our tenons. So in some places we're a little bit out of square, so we just have to go back in with my rabbiting block plane and just tighten up those shoulders just a little bit, just so everything is sitting nice and flush. Also right now we're sitting on a bit of a skew, so we just got to make sure that we correct that so that when we actually get to the glue up, we know that nothing's going to go wrong. We're also going to start adding in our step design. So we're going to fully sand these two long stretchers up to 220 grit because that's apparently what you're supposed to use for Osmo. Then we'll add in our 1/8 inch roundover. Then we'll go back in with our divider pieces and take them down by that 1/8 of an inch so that they're sitting flush underneath these top and bottom stretchers here. We're going to do that on both sides of this because like I said at the beginning of this project, I want this thing to look good. From there, we can go and finish sand all of our inner panels here up to 220 grit with a nice hand sanding. So then the goal here is that tomorrow when we come to the shop, we can clean up those dowels, just touch up any of the areas that kind of get screwed up during the glue up, and then we'll finish it off by cutting our tenons onto the ends here. Now, like I said in yesterday's video, I want to cut the tenons after we've got the whole thing glued up because my biggest concern right now is that if I spend a lot of time cutting the tenons onto these pieces when they're separate from the actual assembly here, there's a good chance that the shoulder of that tenon is not going to line up nicely with this piece we have in here when we do the glue up. So I figure that if everything is solid, I can find a way to work around and match our shoulder line perfectly up to this piece. Even if it means taking a little bit of material off of these end pieces here with the track saw or whatever, we can clean all that up pretty easily. I just want to make sure that our shoulder line is just perfectly straight across here following the edge of this piece. So we're going to get these side rails just fully disassembled. We're going to get the sander out and we're just going to start by using the random orbital sander to clean up all of the tear out, the milling marks and that are on our long stretchers so that we can go back in and add in our profiles there. Okay, so that lasted all of 30 seconds. I'm thinking now, if I set up the roller stands on either side of the drum sander, just like we did with the planer, that we might be able to just pass these through the drum sander a few times to get them down to, you know, fully cleaned up. Okay, so I genuinely thought that was going to work. The roller stands definitely weren't going to work. The ones that I have, they're just Home Depot brand roller stands. They're completely bent on their bases. They've been that way since I got them, and I didn't think to return them at the time. So they're a little bit too wobbly. They just weren't going to work. Plus, then the other part of this is the drive belt on the bottom of this drum sander just doesn't have enough grip on it to pull these pieces through. And so as soon as it hit those roller stands, there's just too much resistance, and the pieces just jammed up. So the whole drum sander idea, it would have been great, but yeah, it's not going to work for these pieces. They're just a little bit too long, so we're going to go back to hand sanding I might pull out the hand plane, just see if I can use that to get through some of this rougher stock that we have on the outside here, and to now clean up some of the issues I may have caused with the drum sander, because the drum sander definitely did some tapering to them. Alright, so the sanding is now done, and we can move on. I decided to only go up to 180 grit because I think that's all we really need, but I need to get a new sander. Both my hands are just... and I'm not even faking right now, it's super annoying. I hate this so much. Anyway, I do need to get a better sander someday, but yeah, that sanding hard maple it's not fun. It's way more work. It took way longer than I was expecting it to. That was like 2 hours of just back and forth and back and forth, and my arms are numb. I had to put on my actual hearing protection because the sounds of everything was just so deafening. Normally I'm fine just wearing my normal headphones when I'm sanding. You know, it's usually not too bad, but yeah, this was just so long. So very long. So next thing we're gonna do is go through and hand plane all of our edges. I'm gonna use a hand plane there because I can actually hand plane. I tried to use the hand plane on the faces with a 50-degree blade in there. It took too much effort. That's honestly just where I landed on it. It was way too much effort to push that plane through there with that 50-degree blade. So it just didn't seem like it was gonna be a worthwhile thing. Then once we have the edges cleaned up, we can move on to fitting up our smaller pieces. So we're gonna clean up those tenons, make sure the shoulders are all nice and square all the way around. Then we're gonna go back to the lovely drum sander and use that to do most of the cleanup work on these pieces. I'm so glad to be doing that because I don't want to sand anymore. Even though I know looking around the garage right now at the different components that are gonna have to go into this bed, there is still a lot more sanding to do and a lot more shaking hand syndrome to be going on here. Listen, I know we've had our issues in the past, but I just want to say I appreciate all the hard work you do. Alright guys, so that is going to do it for today. We've got all of our parts sanded up to 220 grit because apparently that's what you want to do for Osmo. I didn't know that. I thought it was the same as the tried and true. So I sanded all the way up to 220 grit, except for our outer two stretchers. I'm going to finish those up once we do the glue up and all that. We're not going to get to that today because I'm completely out of time in the shop. It's a little after 6 o'clock right now, so I'm running real late today. But the sanding on this just took so much longer. Obviously this morning when I said we might get onto the headboard later today, I overestimated that big time. Going through and sanding all this maple is such a pain in the butt because it takes so much longer. I went through so many more sanding discs just purely because maple is such a hard and dense wood. All of the stuff that I ended up having to sand through just took so much longer. But the parts are now all fully sanded up. They're looking really good. I love our transitions that we've got in here. This step design just looks so good. It's, by far my favorite style. And the best thing about doing all this sanding is it gave me time to think about how I want to do this project and mainly about how I want to deal with these tenons. And I think what we're going to do is a floating tenon. Now, we'll talk about it more when we actually get to that stage, but what I was thinking is that if I just completely cut off this end with the track saw once we're all glued up, we'll get a perfectly square edge that will then line up against our legs. Then all we have to do is add in some floating tenons, and then we have this kind of perfectly set up piece. Now, if you don't know what a floating tenon is, basically it's a domino joint just with the more traditional style. So I don't own a domino joiner. I don't plan to be buying a domino joiner because that's just way too much of an expense right now. But the traditional joint that a domino joiner makes is called a floating tenon. So you can see how it kind of gets that name is that it's rather than having a tenon and a mortise, you're going to have two mortises and then a tenon that floats between them. Then when that gets glued together, it's basically the exact same as mortise and tenon joinery. And again, the tenons on these side rails are really only there for alignment. They're just there to make sure everything gets together. The bed bolt is what's doing the majority of the holding power here. So I do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.